Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the brand new Backfire Zealot S electric skateboard. Now keep in mind, I'm only doing this from like a first impressions of this board because I've barely ridden this board, but I at least thought I've ridden it enough at this point to really give you my early impressions of this board, how I'm really feeling about this board, how I like this board, what I like and dislike about this board. Keep in mind, in the near future, stay tuned to the channel and I will be doing a couple more videos on this board. I will be comparing it to another board, which I'm very excited to do. And then I'll also be doing another review when I've ridden it a little bit longer so I can really assess the board for what it is. But right now, this is just my early impressions of this board. And unfortunately, I really have no great way to really record myself riding the board. But you've already seen people ride these boards before, so it's nothing new and it really wouldn't matter. I just really want to talk about this board in full detail at this very moment, at least from what I've ridden and things like that. So without further ado, let's start the video. So here is the Backfire Zealot S electric skateboard. And how am I feeling about this board? Well, long story short, I'm actually really liking this board. Do I think it's a perfect board? By no means do I think this is a perfect board. I actually have a couple of complaints about this board, which I'm not too happy about, but for the most part, the pros outweigh the cons for me. And honestly, I'm super happy I actually decided to pick up the Backfire Zealot S. Now, without further ado, let's start off with the most important thing you want to know about, of course, and that's actually going to be about the specs, because that's what you want to know, especially since this board is quite expensive for what it is. First off, let's talk about top speed. When it comes to top speed on this board, I think for most people, even speed demons are going to be extremely happy with the speed this can pull. This can pull about 30 miles per hour when it comes to the top speed. Just keep in mind your results will vary because it depends on a lot of different things, like are you riding in wind, how heavy you weigh, the terrain you're riding on and things like that. So you may not get exactly 30 miles per hour when it comes to top speed, but you should get somewhere close. And again, I'm telling you, for most people out there, that's going to be plenty fast when it comes to an electric skateboard. 30 miles per hour is definitely no joke. At least if you can get around there, definitely you'll feel like you're going pretty fast, because you do have to remember you are practically riding on a piece of wood, and riding on a piece of wood when you're standing up in the open just seems like you're going very fast, even faster than 30. In a car, it doesn't seem fast, but on an electric skateboard, if you never used one, it's definitely very fast. And in some situations, you can feel like it can be kind of like sketchy, or kind of like an adrenaline rush if you've ever been that fast. So speed is not a problem on this board. I'm very happy about the speed on this board. And then let's talk about the range, because you want to know how long you can go on one single charge. When it comes to range on this board, the range on this board is also very excellent. It's not the best on the market, I will have to agree. There are boards on the market that easily get better range than this, but of course they cost more money and things like that. When it comes to range, you're easily able to get about close to 19 to maybe 24 miles on a single charge, which would be plenty for most riders. Again, just like the top speed, you do have to take a couple of different things into consideration: where you're riding, how heavy you're riding, how fast you're riding, because the more faster you're riding means the less range you'll actually get. And also, if you're heavier, you'll get less range out of this board and things like that. But I think for a lot of people, just like the top speed, I think the range on this is absolutely fantastic. You're still getting on the upper end of what electric skateboards can usually get. We're not talking about a budget board here. We're not talking about an average average range for an electric skateboard. We're talking about some serious range here. Again, 19 to 24 miles of range. You can get more or you can get less depending on how aggressive you are and how heavy you are. I want to get that out the way. And the battery on this thing, talking about the battery as well, since we're talking about range, the battery is absolutely fairly beefy. It's like 340 watt, which is on the upper end of electric skateboard technology. Sure, like I said again, there's boards out there that do get better range, but of course you are going to be paying more for those boards. And I think at this price point of this board, I think you're going to love the range and the speed on this board. And now let's actually talk about comfort, talk about wheels, and talk about the actual board itself. So first off, when it comes to the wheels, they're utilizing 96 millimeter wheels for the wheels, and that is standard, especially for Backfire boards. Most Backfire boards, if not all, their street boards actually utilize 96 millimeter wheels. And what I can say is 96 millimeter wheels are definitely very good. They're not the most biggest thing out there, but they're also not the most smallest thing out there. Also, considering this is a belt-driven board, which I haven't even talked about yet, I think paired with 96 millimeter wheels, you're definitely going to be happy with the ride of this thing. It definitely rides over a lot of different terrain and a lot of different pavement. Very nice. You don't really feel like it's sketchy. You don't really feel like you're going to wobble and things like that. Also, they are pairing these 96 millimeter wheels with their own precision trucks, and these trucks are supposed to be absolutely fantastic, especially at top speeds, which is absolutely great. Keep in mind, these are in-house trucks from Backfire. They're supposed to be forged or something like that. They're not talking about like caliper trucks or Paris trucks. We're talking about in-house trucks, and apparently, from what I know, these are new trucks for the Backfire brand, but so far they're pretty good trucks, if you ask me, especially paired with 96 millimeter wheels, and I'm glad they're actually utilizing 96 millimeter wheels. And then when it comes to the deck and comfort, that's where things for me personally get a little bit interesting. First off, some people will tell you this deck is kind of flexy, and for me specifically, of course, just like anything else, like the speed and the range you're going to get, it will vary from rider to rider a little bit, just because some riders are more heavier, so the board may get more saggier or maybe more flexible. But for me, I weigh anywhere from 150 to about 155, depending on the day and things like that. But for the most part, I weigh around 150, and what I can tell you from that alone, I can definitely tell you this deck is very stiff for me personally. If you are a little bit heavier, it may be a little bit more flexible or a little bit more bottomed out, but for me it's very stiff, and honestly it's a good and a bad thing if you ask me. On one hand, it's great when I'm definitely going over speeds above 20 miles per hour. That's where I feel like you really want a very stiff deck, just so that you're very stable and things like that. But on the other hand, I'm not really a big fan of this stiff deck, at least in my opinion, again, for my weight, just due to the fact that I personally, a lot of times, am not a speed demon or even a person that likes going that fast. My average speed for me personally is about, let's say, 13, 14, 15, 16 miles per hour. That's cruising speed. That's comfortable. That's where I just like feeling like I can concentrate and things like that. But at those speeds, I really do feel like the board is a little bit too stiff, and right away when I first hopped on this for the very first time, I immediately noticed that this board, at least compared to my other board, felt a little bit more uncomfortable, especially at those slower speeds. I don't know why that is. I think it's just due to the deck being a different material and the deck being a little bit more stiff to begin with. For me, in my case, I think that really doesn't help the case. So for me, I have to take occasional break just because my feet get a little bit uncomfortable. It's not so uncomfortable I can't ride the board at those speeds. I want to make that clear, but it is uncomfortable enough to where at least I can notice my feet feeling some type of fatigue, feeling some type of tiredness, and I kind of feel like after a while, I kind of just want to sit down and relax. If I'm going at faster speeds, that's where I really think the stiffness does really come in handy, because it is stiff enough for me to where I feel like I'm very stable at those speeds. Also, one thing I did notice, which is just going to be personal preference and also going to depend on how you get this from the factory, but for me personally, my very first ride wasn't the greatest, just due to the fact that the trucks on this thing weren't loose enough for me. If you didn't know anything about skateboards, not just electric skateboards, basically how it works is you kind of want the truck set a little bit loose so you can turn very easily. The tighter the trucks are, the harder it is to turn, but you don't want them too loose because then they can fall off. You want them somewhere in the middle ground. And for me, it's too tight out of the box where I can still turn, but it's enough to where sometimes I have to pick up the board and physically move it, or I have to do these very tight turns and lean my body so far that I feel like I'm going to fall off. So I definitely need to adjust the trucks. The thing is, when I first got this out of the box, I did a test run like a little bit, and what I found out was I thought it was set up just right, but after riding a very long trip, I ended up not liking the way the trucks were set up, so I'm definitely going to have to make the trucks a little bit looser and do some testing. On that note, I do want to talk about how you can use this as like a standard longboard or a standard skateboard. So if you didn't know, a lot of electric skateboards, when they run out of battery, you can actually use them as like a standard skateboard or a longboard and just push them. A lot of people will tell you specifically on belt-driven boards, which this is, again, a belt-driven board. A lot of people will tell you specifically, listen, you cannot push this that easy because you will have some resistance from the belts being there. And that is true. And the thing is, with most electric skateboards, if not all, they're very heavy in weight, which this is 20 pounds, which on the topic of that really quickly, I just wanted to say that this thing is pretty heavy. And for the most part, you want this under your feet at all costs just because it's a little bit too heavy. But for the most part, you're probably going to be riding this 99% of the time, if not all the time. So weight's not really a big deal. But going back to basically what I was saying about how you can use this as a regular board, basically people were saying this has resistance on the motors and things because it has a belt, which is true. And on top of that, this thing is very heavy. It weighs around 20 pounds. And for a skateboard or a longboard, that is very heavy, especially if you're coming from regular longboards or regular skateboards. And from my test, it's actually not that bad to push. I was just actually pretty surprised just because I've always heard stories on the internet about how, oh, you can't really push a belt-driven board. Belt-driven boards are boards that are a little bit too heavy and has too much resistance to push. And in my experience, that's not totally true. I think it is very easy to push. I will have to admit though, like most people, it's not really practical to actually be pushing this board around just because it's a little bit too heavy and it does have that resistance. But if you need to push it, you can definitely push it like a regular skateboard or a regular longboard. That's something that I absolutely like about this board, but I will say it's not really practical and it really doesn't make sense. So for the most part, you're going to have it turned on and ride it like a regular electric skateboard, but that makes sense. That's, of course, why you bought a board like this. Now let's actually go ahead and go to the back of the board because I do want to talk about something else. I do actually want to talk about the actual lights on this board because there are actual lights on this board, and I have tested the lights on this board, especially at nighttime, and I find the lights actually pretty interesting on this board. So this board does come with lights, and if you didn't know, Backfire actually makes two different Zealot boards. They make the regular Zealot, which came out in 2020, and then in 2021, this year, like a couple months ago, they came out with the Zealot S, and this is the Zealot S. And the easiest way to tell which Zealot you have, if you're unaware, you basically check what color the lights are. So white lights will be the Backfire regular Zealot, and then purple lights will be the brand new Zealot S, which this is the Zealot S, and this does have purple lights. So let's go ahead and actually turn this on so I can show you the actual lights, and then also I can talk about the remote control situation as well. I'll show you the lights, then I will actually talk about the remote situation here. So let's go ahead and actually turn on the lights. So the lights on the board are actually on. You can see they are purple. I wanted to bring up the lights because for me personally, and I think a lot of people will actually agree, they're still useful at night since I have ridden them at night, but they don't really light up the road because they're not in front of you. They're actually on the side of the board. I don't know how these lights look to pedestrians and to other cars on the road, but when you're riding them, you really can't see in front of you when you're riding the board, but that makes sense. They're on the side of the board, and honestly, for the most part, in my opinion, again, I'm not too sure how pedestrians and other vehicles on the road see the lights, but from a usable standpoint, from a person riding the board, I think they're honestly kind of useless. But again, since they're part of the board and they are there, there's no reason not to enable them, because honestly, the lights on this board don't drain any battery at all, so don't worry about turning them on. You won't notice the difference from riding this board with the lights on from riding the board with the lights off. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't drain battery at all. But I just wanted to bring that up about the lights. I really personally think they're useless. They're still better than nothing, and I do have to agree, just keep them on all the time if you need to. And again, they might be better for pedestrians and for other vehicles on the road, because again, I don't know from their perspective how they actually see the board when it actually has lights. So just take that for what it is. But it's still a cool addition. I'm not going to disagree. Any lights are better than no lights, especially if you're riding at nighttime. But now let's actually go over the remote, because I have a couple of things to talk about when it comes to this remote specifically. So here is the remote for the Backfire Zealot S right here. It's pretty much a rubbery remote. It does feel pretty light, so at first glance it may feel a little bit cheap and a little bit plasticky, but honestly, I really do like the actual feel of this with the whole rubber material. It really does feel very secure in the hands. It feels very nice. It feels very premium, especially considering that it is an expensive board, and compared to other remote controls on the market. I am a big fan of this remote control overall. It has a little hole for one of your fingers. It also has like a curve at the top if you want to put one of your fingers. It just overall feels really nice. I love the fact it has the Backfire branding on the remote. Some remotes don't have any branding, so it's cool that it has that little nice touch. The only thing I'm not a fan of, which I talked about in my unboxing, but I guess this is pretty much all remote controls. They're normally made for right-handers. They're not normally made for left-handers, which this is true, because if you were to use this in your left hand, which I will show you now, here's my left hand right here. It's hard to really see the screen on the remote and all the buttons because you're holding it like this most of the time, so you're looking at the back of the remote. I mean, you can still use it like this, of course, but it is a little bit more clunky, and they really want you to use it in your right hand. I guess it's kind of like using a mouse on a computer. For the most part, they're made for right-handers, and you just get used to it. So yeah, I'll just get used to it, but here it is. But overall, like I said, I really do love this remote. Now, for the Backfire Zealot S specifically, there's other boards that do this, but I think in the Backfire lineup, this may be one of, if not the only board that does this. You do have remote start, which is actually pretty convenient. It's not the end of the world if you don't have remote start, but it is a nice benefit. Basically, when I press the power button, it automatically turns on the board for the very first time, and it also turns on the board each and every time, so you don't have to bend over every time you're going to ride the board and press the power button on the board itself, which is actually nice, because bending over is kind of an inconvenience. But again, it's not the end of the world, so I am glad it does have remote start. Let me go ahead and click the remote. As you'll see, it turns on the board, and it also, yeah, it turns on the board and turns on the remote, and you can pretty much start riding. There is one thing to note about this, actually, really quickly, is the fact that you cannot turn off the board remotely if you are actually riding the board. I know that may seem kind of stupid, but honestly, I was in the thinking that maybe if I'm riding very slow, or if I'm pushing it and I'm only going like 1 or 2 miles per hour, maybe I can turn off the board, get off it, and be done with my ride, but that's not the case. Basically, you have to be fully stopped on this board before you can actually turn it off, but that makes sense. It probably assumes the motors are going and it doesn't want to eject you from the ride, or maybe if you have to brake for whatever the case may be, it doesn't want you accidentally turning off the board, so you cannot turn off the board, in my case, without the board fully being stopped. So once the board's fully being stopped, then you can totally turn off the board for the very first time. Now let's actually talk about some stuff that you probably aren't aware of, which you may not even know exist. You have a couple of different options when it comes to different settings on the remote control, and I actually want to show you how to enable those modes really quickly, which I've already touched on before, but I do want to touch on them again, at least in this video. So first and foremost, you can change how it actually tracks your speed and your mileage. You can do kilometers, or you can do miles per hour. It's set by default to kilometers, which makes sense, of course, because most places in the world are kilometers, of course, but of course I live in America, and America uses miles per hour for whatever the case may be. So let's go ahead and actually show you how to actually change a lot of the settings, because there's two different settings you can change in here. So basically the way you access the settings on this board is you basically want to turn on, or basically want to hold down the power button on the remote for 5 seconds, and also press the power button on the remote as well. Basically you want to press the power button on both the remote and the board for 5 seconds simultaneously until a message comes up. So let's go ahead and hold it. It is a little bit tricky, especially if you don't have anybody around to press the other button, and especially since I'm holding a camera. But let's go ahead and try to do this really quickly. So both the power on the remote control and power on the board down for 5 seconds. It does say pairing remote, and that's actually a good sign. You want it to be pairing. Out the box, the remote is already paired, but this is the only way to get to those functions. They're actually hidden. I'll have to do this again because, again, like I said before, it is a little bit tricky to do this for on camera, but let's try this again. I might actually have to set down the camera. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, paired complete. Once it says paired complete, it'll start flashing on the actual board, which is completely fine. And then you'll have some settings that come up on the actual remote. Sorry if my camera is not picking up the screen too well on the remote, because it is very small. And then second of all, it's a little bit too bright, and as far as I know, you can't change the brightness of the actual screen. And I also want to touch on the screen, since we're talking about the screen, I guess. I do like the screen. The screen is very nice. I just think it's a little bit too small, and I'm not really a fan of the angle of the screen, because some electric skateboards, you look at the screen just like this. You don't have to tilt it, but you have to tilt this remote to kind of see your battery indicator, how fast you're going, your distance you rode in, and everything like that. But it is what it is. But basically right now, on the remote control, it does say speed unit select, kilometers or miles per hour. And basically what you want to do is you want to press the second button. So the first one is the power button, and the second one is like your speed modes, where you can actually change the speed. You got eco mode, sports mode, and then on this button you have a turbo mode. Eco mode goes up to 12 miles per hour, and then sports mode goes up to like 25 miles per hour, and then turbo mode goes up to 30 miles per hour. But anyway, you want to take the speed selection mode, and then you want to click it, and once you click it, it'll change from kilometers to miles per hour. Don't know again how well it's showing up on camera, and it'll start vibrating to indicate you're switching modes. I'm gonna have it locked on miles per hour since I live in America, and then press the power button to confirm it. And then the last one that it'll show you, which is actually a pretty useful setting if you need to use it, is basically if you change wheels on this board, it will get all out of funk, and it will basically track your miles per hour, your speed, pretty much inaccurate. So you want to change what type of wheels you're actually using. By default, it's set to 96 millimeter, because of course the wheels are 96 millimeter out of the box, so that's good. But basically, again, you take the second button on the remote, you click it, it'll vibrate, and you have a couple of different options. You have 105 millimeter, 85 millimeter, 96 millimeter, and 165 millimeter. And if you use anything in between, it's going to be kind of clunky. I guess just use your best judgment and use the diameter that's closest to your wheel configuration. But I'm going to have it on 96 millimeter. I'm going to click the power button, and yeah, I'm pretty much good to go. And then of course on the remote, it will show you the battery of the board, the battery of the remote. It'll show you how fast you're going at the current time. It'll also track how many miles you've gone in that single ride. And then on top of that, it'll also show you how many miles you have lifetime of the board, which is actually very nice. Also, if you've never ridden any board, these boards do have, at least Backfire boards, actually do have like a sensor on this. When the battery gets to like, I think 25 or 20%, the remote control will vibrate at you while you're holding it to indicate that you're low power. And then on top of that, it will have an indicator like on the actual screen that'll say check power voltage low, 20 to 25%. Even if it's at 20 to 25%, don't worry about it, because you can still go quite some time on 20 to 25% battery. On top of that, I actually like that indicator. I think it's very useful, so you know that you still have some battery left in it, but it's just telling you that you're low on battery, which is actually nice. Also, this remote does actually have like a little What I was saying was this remote control does have a reverse switch, so if you press the throttle and you press it back, it'll start reversing you. Just be careful of not keeping it in reverse when you first start, because you may accidentally fall off because you don't realize it's in reverse, so just keep that in mind. But that's a nice little thing that not every board has. Some boards you can't actually reverse. When you try to reverse on the actual throttle, which this is the throttle, of course, I did forget to mention that, it does actually just stop the board altogether. It breaks the board, but this one does have an option to reverse it completely. You may be wondering why you would ever need to reverse instead of just completely stopping. Well, maybe you're on a hill, or maybe you're on the sidewalk, but you're kind of out in the street. You can kind of reverse the board without having to get off the board and pushing it backwards or picking it up. That's something I absolutely like as well. And then on the bottom, I don't know again how well it's picking it up, but it does support USB Type-C charging, which is convenient, of course, because a lot of things do have USB Type-C support, which is nice. Like a lot of phones, a lot of tablets, a lot of just equipment use USB Type-C, so that's also very convenient right there. And then the last thing I want to show you on the battery pack, you do have the charging port, which is nice, but then you also have a USB port, sorry, it's just a standard USB-A port like on a computer. But the thing is, that's nice about this port is the fact that you can charge stuff on here, whether it's the remote control that comes in the box or pretty much any device that's USB powered, like a smartphone, a tablet, a game system like the Switch, basically anything. And that's nice in case you're in a situation and you need to charge something because you're desperate. Maybe let's say the remote control died and you need some little juice to get back, or better yet, you need to call for help but your phone died or something. You can charge it really quickly on the battery. Just remember, of course, it does use the battery pack that does come with the board, so you will lose some range as you're charging. This charger, as far as I'm aware, is a slow charger, so you won't really see any benefits, but it should be enough charge that you can actually like use your phone or something and then call it a day. It's pretty much just for emergencies as far as I'm aware, because for the most part you want to save all the battery for the board, of course, so you can actually ride the board. But again, that is a nice feature on this board, but which not every board on the market actually has a feature like that, which is actually great. And yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about this board. For the most part, do I think this board is worth the money? Absolutely, without a doubt. I don't think I have any hesitations or any regrets of this board. So far, I absolutely love this board. Again, keep in mind, all my impressions in this video are actually from like early first impressions. I'm going to do another review in the near future of much more. I can't really say this was not a detailed review because obviously it was. You can see how long I've been going. But what I'm going to say is I want to do another video where I talk more about it once I've had more time on the board. Maybe my thoughts will change of the stiffness. Maybe I'll get used to it. Maybe my feet won't hurt as much. Maybe something else will change, so I will do that. But that will be in the near upcoming future. And if you made it this far, I'm going to do a big spoiler right now of what board I want to actually compare this to. So right now, I own one other electric skateboard, and that other electric skateboard is actually a very good comparison video that you probably want to stay tuned to, which I probably should have said at the beginning of the video just because it's very important to a lot of people. Basically, I'm going to be comparing this board, the Zealot S, to Backfire's budget option, and their budget option is actually the Backfire G2. And the Backfire G2 that I own is actually the newer version. They made two Backfire G2s, or three, I can't remember, but they made a couple of Backfire G2s. And the thing is, with the Backfire G2, I own the new one, the Backfire G2 2020 edition, and that is the cheapest board that they currently offer. This is one of their more expensive ones, if not the most expensive one. There is more expensive ones from Backfire, but the thing is, they are all-terrain boards. So if you're looking for a street board like this, you either go basically you go with this board, basically you go with this board because this is their most expensive option when it comes to street boards. So I will be comparing their cheapest option, the Backfire G2 2020, to this brand new Backfire Zealot S board. So stay tuned for that because I do have a lot to say, and maybe you're on the fence because granted, the Backfire G2 is a fairly cheap board for what it is, and this board is much more expensive than that, and you really want to make sure you know what you're going to be buying as a rider and as a person who's trying to get into the sport, or maybe you've already been into the sport, whatever the case may be. So I want to do a full review of that as well. So stay tuned for that on the channel in the near future. But without further ado, that's been my first impressions of the Backfire Zealot S electric skateboard. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.